The twin sons of Zara scorched the crimson dunes like ancient eyes watching judgment unfold. Dust devils spiraled through the ruins of what had once been a trade outpost. Now just shattered ferrocrete and the skeletal remains of dropships blackened by plasma fire. Amid the wreckage, a lone figure knelt, cradling a scorched medkit in bloodied hands. His name was Reese. Not a soldier by choice, but by circumstance. A field medic of the Terran Coalition, now the last man standing in a war that had long forgotten the reason it began. His uniform, once crisp and navy blue, hung in tatters, stained with sand, sweat, and someone else's blood. Most of it not his. He'd patched up a dozen men that morning, only to watch them vaporized minutes later by a Kelthari shockwave. And yet he stayed, because somewhere in this wasteland, a blue-skinned woman with white hair and eyes like storm-lit glaciers had told him, "If you run, you'll never stop." Her name was Vela. She wasn't human. She wasn't even supposed to be on this side of the front. A high-ranking warrior of the Kelthari Dominion. An empire of pale blue humanoids whose culture valued honor above all, and mercy only when earned. Yet here she was, 3 days ago, bleeding from a plasma burn across her ribs, unconscious beneath the hull of a downed scout skiff. Reese had dragged her into cover, muttering curses about stupid alien pride, and stitched her wound with hands that shook not from fear, but from exhaustion. He hadn't known who she was then, just another casualty in a galaxy gone mad with war. But when she woke, instead of gutting him on sight, she'd stared at him the way someone might stare at a miracle. Quiet, confused, reverent. They'd spoken little since. Words were expensive in a desert where silence could mean survival. But every glance, every shared canteen of filtered water, every time she silently handed him a protein bar from her belt pouch, it all built something fragile and wordless between them. Reese had never felt anything like it. Not in the barracks, not in the crowded streets of New Cairo, not even with Lara back home, whose letters had stopped coming a year into the deployment. Vela didn't flirt. She didn't promise. She simply was. And in the emptiness of Zara's wastes, that was enough. Now, as the dust settled from the latest skirmish, Reese heard it. The thunder of armored footsteps, but not Terran boots. Too light, too rhythmic. He turned slowly, his pulse hammering, not from fear of death, but from fear of what might happen if they found Vela's body. Only she wasn't dead. She stood, tall, regal. Her white hair, usually braided tightly for battle, now streamed behind her like comet trails caught in solar wind. Her blue skin shimmered under the suns, marked with ritual scars that glowed faintly with bioluminescence, a sign of her elite bloodline. Her armor, cracked and scorched, still bore the insignia of the Azure Fong, the Kelthari's fiercest warrior clan. In one hand, she held a plasma lance humming with unstable energy. In the other, she gripped the collar of a captured Terran officer, a man with stripes on his shoulder and terror in his eyes. "He ordered the strike," Vela said, her voice low, smooth as polished obsidian, yet carrying the weight of a collapsing star. He called it Scorched Earth Protocol. He didn't care that med tents were marked, that children were hiding in the rubble, that Reese was there. The Terran officer spat blood. "You're a traitor, Kelthari. You sided with the enemy." "I sided with him," Vela said, jerking her chin toward Reese. "And that makes me judge, jury, and executioner." Reese stood slowly, heart pounding. "Vela, don't. It won't bring them back." She turned her storm-gray eyes to him. For a moment, the fury softened, revealing something raw and trembling beneath. The woman who'd once asked him, voice barely above a whisper, "Do your people dream in color, Reese? Or only in gray like your wars?" But then her expression hardened again. She shoved the officer to his knees. Around them, the dunes rose like silent spectators. And then they appeared. From the northern ridge, 5 figures descended. Tall, lithe, clad in armor woven from starlight metal and desert weave. Blue-skinned like Vela, their white hair braided with silver beads that chimed softly with each step. Warrior women of the Azure Fong, each bearing the same glowing scars, the same lethal grace. Their leader, a woman with eyes like frozen mercury and a plasmasimeter strapped across her back, stepped forward. "Vela of the 7th bloodline," she said, her voice resonating like temple bells. "You have disgraced our name by shielding a human, by loving one." Vela didn't flinch. "I have honored our code. He saved my life when he owed me nothing. He tends the wounded of both sides. He carries no hate in his hands, only healing." The warrior woman, Commander Nasara, laughed. A cold, brittle sound. Sentiment is weakness, and weakness gets our sisters killed. He didn't kill them, Rhys said, stepping between them. He knew it was stupid. He was one man against 5 elite warriors. But something in Vela's voice, the way it cracked when she said his name, made him stand. Nasara's gaze snapped to him, sharp enough to draw blood. Silence, fleshworm. You are not part of this reckoning. I am, Vela said, her voice rising. Because if you lay a single finger on him... She paused, her eyes blazing with a fire that had nothing to do with plasma or suns. Touch him, and watch me burn planets. The words hung in the air like a detonation waiting to happen. Nasara's eyes widened, not with fear but with recognition. That phrase wasn't just a threat. It was a vow from the oldest Kelthari oath, the Zarvok. A pledge so ancient and absolute, only members of the royal bloodline were permitted to speak it. To utter it meant you would sacrifice everything, homeworld, honor, even your soul, for the one you swore to protect. You've taken the oath, Nasara whispered, her voice trembling now. For a human? Vela lifted her chin. He is more Kelthari in spirit than half our warlords. He shows mercy without expecting return. He fights only to protect, never to conquer. And when I was broken, he didn't ask for my rank or my name. He just fixed me. Rhys felt a lump rise in his throat. He'd never thought of himself as anything special. Just a guy who knew how to stitch a wound and keep his head down. But the way she said it, like he was some kind of hero, made his chest ache. Nasara stepped closer, her hand resting on her scimitar's hilt. Then you leave us no choice. The council has already declared you rogue. If you will not return to the fleet for judgment, we will drag you back in chains, or kill you where you stand. Before Rhys could speak, Vela moved. In a blur of blue and silver, she shoved him behind her and raised her plasma lance. Then come. But know this, if one of you dies today, it will be because you forced my hand. And your families will curse your names for generations. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The wind howled through the ruins. A vulture circled overhead. And then, from the south, a low rumble shook the ground. Not thunder. Engines. Rhys recognized the sound instantly. Terran dropships. Reinforcements. Or worse, orbital command calling in a full bombardment. His stomach dropped. They'd paint the whole sector with fire to wipe out the Kelthari presence. And him with it. We have to go, he said urgently. Now. Vela didn't take her eyes off Nasara. Where? East Ridge. There's an old sandcrawler half buried in the dunes. I hid med supplies there yesterday. It's got enough power to reach the neutral zone, maybe. Nasara smirked. Running? How unwarrior-like. I'm not running, Vela said, turning slightly to glance at Rhys. I'm choosing my battlefield. And with that, she grabbed his wrist, her fingers cool and strong, and pulled him into a sprint. Behind them, the warrior women gave chase, their boots kicking up plumes of red dust. Plasma bolts sizzled past Rhys's ears, carving molten craters in the sand. He ran harder than he ever had, lungs burning, legs screaming, but Vela never let go. They reached the sandcrawler just as the first dropship screamed overhead, its shadow swallowing the dunes. Rhys yanked open the rusted hatch, shoving Vela inside before scrambling in after her. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life like an old beast remembering its strength. He slammed the throttle forward, and the crawler lurched eastward, tracks grinding over bone-dry rock. Behind them, the Kelthari warriors didn't follow on foot. Instead, they activated wrist communicators. Moments later, 3 sleek skiffs, sleek, silent, and deadly, rose from the dunes like sharks breaking water. They gave chase, weapons humming. Inside the sandcrawler, Rhys fumbled with the controls, sweat dripping into his eyes. I don't suppose you know how to hotwire a plasma turret? Vela was already at the rear console, her fingers flying over the interface. It's primitive, but I can reroute the coolant system to overload the power core. If we trigger it at the right moment. You want to blow it up while we're still in it? Not in it, she said, flashing him a rare, fierce grin. Behind it. He stared at her. You're insane. And you patch up enemies, she shot back. We're a matched pair. Despite everything, he laughed. A short, breathless sound that felt like hope. He adjusted their course, weaving through a narrow canyon of wind-carved rock. The skiffs followed, relentless. One fired, and the sandcrawler's left tread exploded in a shower of sparks. "We're losing it," Rhys yelled. "Now!" Vela shouted, slamming her fist onto the console. The rear of the sandcrawler erupted in a blinding blue-white explosion. The shockwave flipped one skiff end over end. The other two veered wildly to avoid the fireball. Rhys didn't look back. He steered hard left, into a dry riverbed that twisted like a serpent through the desert. Hours passed. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds. The skiffs didn't reappear. Whether they'd been destroyed or called off, Rhys didn't know. All he knew was that they were alive, for now. They stopped at the edge of a salt flat, the crawler wheezing like a dying animal. Rhys climbed out, legs numb, and leaned against the hot metal. Vela joined him, her armor scorched, her hair matted with dust. She looked exhausted, but alive, so beautifully alive. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. "The oath, the threat. You could have walked away, gone back to your people." She looked at him, her storm-gray eyes softening. "Because they see you as less, as meat in a uniform. But I've seen you hold a dying child's hand for an hour, just so she wouldn't be alone. I've seen you give your last water to a wounded enemy. You carry kindness like a weapon, and in this galaxy, that's the rarest kind of strength." Rhys looked away, his throat tight. "I'm just a medic." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You're the reason I still believe peace is possible. Even if it takes 1,000 lifetimes." He wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him. So instead, he reached for her hand. She let him take it, her cool fingers curling around his rough, calloused ones. And in that silence, under a sky blazing with alien stars, something new began. Not just survival, but partnership. A peace they both knew wouldn't come easy. Days later, they reached the edge of the neutral zone. A dusty trading post called Kelvar Oasis, built around a deep aquifer rumored to be older than the war itself. It was a haven for deserters, smugglers, black market doctors, and refugees from both sides. Humans and Kelthari mingled here uneasily, weapons holstered but eyes wary. Rhys sold his medkit for credits and a forged ID chip. Vela bartered a plasma cell for 2 canteens and a map of the underground tunnels that led to the outer rim. They moved like ghosts, always watching their backs. Because word traveled fast in places like this, and whispers had already begun. The Azure Fang's heir has gone rogue. She swore the Zarvok for a human. They say she'll burn worlds for him. Some looked at Rhys with envy, others with disgust, a few with fear. But Vela walked beside him like a queen, head high, hand never far from her weapon. And Rhys? He walked like a man who'd finally found something worth fighting for, not just surviving. One night, as they camped in a hidden alcove beneath the oasis's main plaza, Rhys asked the question that had been gnawing at him. "What happens now? Even if we reach the outer rim, your people won't stop hunting you. And mine will shoot me on sight for consorting with the enemy." Vela stared into the small fire she'd made from dried scrub. "Then we build something new, somewhere no one knows our names. Somewhere your hands can heal instead of just patching wounds made by war." He smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she admitted. "But nothing worth doing ever is." Just then, a rustle came from the tunnel entrance. Rhys tensed, hand going to the knife at his belt. But it wasn't a soldier. It was a child. A small Kelthari girl, no older than 6, her blue skin smudged with dirt, her white hair tangled. She held out a small, folded piece of paper. "For the human," she whispered, eyes wide with awe. Rhys took it, unfolding it carefully. The message was written in shaky Terran script. But the meaning was clear. "They know you're here. The Fang has sent assassins. Leave before moonrise." Below the words was a symbol, a tiny drawing of a crescent moon over a flame. The mark of the silent dagger, an elite Kelthari death squad. Vela's face went pale. "They wouldn't send the dagger unless the council has declared us irredeemable." Rhys stood, helping her up. "Then we don't wait for moonrise." They moved through the tunnels like shadows, emerging on the far side of the oasis just as the first moon crested the dunes. But the assassins were already waiting. 3 figures, cloaked in matte black armor that absorbed light, stood in a triangle formation. No insignias, no voices, just death made silent and swift. Vela stepped in front of Rhys. "Run. I'm not leaving you. You must." She turned, her eyes full of a sorrow so deep it hurt to look at. "If I fall, tell the stars I died for something real, not for conquest, Not for pride, but for you. Before he could argue, she charged. Plasma blades clashed in flashes of violet and gold. Rhys watched, heart-shattering, as Vela fought like a storm given form, ducking, spinning, striking with lethal precision. She took down one assassin with a blade to the throat. Another fell to a well-placed kick that sent him crashing into a rock wall. But the third, taller, faster, landed a strike that sliced through her shoulder. She stumbled. Rhys's breath caught. And then he moved. Not as a soldier, not as a fighter, but as a man who refused to lose the only good thing left in this broken galaxy. He grabbed a fallen plasma dagger from the first assassin and lunged, not at the killer, but at the sand beneath his feet. He triggered the blade's overload function and threw it down. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was enough to blind the assassin, to throw him off balance. Vela didn't waste the opening. She drove her remaining blade through his chest. Silence fell. She turned to Rhys, blood dripping from her wound, her breath ragged. You idiot. You could have died." He walked toward her, tears in his eyes. "So could you." She tried to smile, but swayed on her feet. He caught her before she fell, holding her as gently as he'd held that dying child weeks ago. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's get you patched up." And as he carried her into the desert night, the twin moons bathing them in silver light, Rhys knew one thing for certain. They weren't just running anymore. They were building. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of stars, a new story was beginning. One where love wasn't weakness, but the ultimate rebellion. Where a human medic and a blue-skinned warrior woman dared to believe that peace wasn't just a dream, but a destination. And if anyone tried to take that from them, well, they'd already warned the galaxy. Touch him, and watch me burn planets. The wound in Vela's shoulder wasn't deep, but it bled more than it should. Dark blue and viscous, shimmering faintly with traces of bioluminescent clotting agents her body struggled to produce. Rhys worked fast under the shelter of a collapsed sandstone arch, his fingers steady despite the tremor in his chest. He'd salvaged antiseptic gel from the last of his emergency kit and used strips of his own undershirt to bind the gash. Vela didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but her breathing was shallow, and the usual sharpness in her eyes had dulled to something distant, almost fragile. "You're burning up?" Rhys murmured, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead. Her skin was hotter than normal, not fever-hot, but the unnatural warmth of a Kelthari system pushing itself beyond its limits. "I'm fine," she insisted, voice hoarse, but her eyelids fluttered, betraying her. "Right," he said dryly, "and I'm the Grand Marshal of Terra." He rummaged through his pack, pulling out the last nutrient bar, half-crushed, slightly melted from the heat, but still edible. "Eat." She took it reluctantly, nibbling at the edge like it might bite back. "We can't stay here long. The dagger never travels alone. Their signal's already been sent." Rhys nodded, scanning the horizon. The desert stretched in every direction. Empty, golden, indifferent. But emptiness was deceptive. He'd learned that the hard way. Out here, silence could hide plasma coils, sensor drones, even entire strike teams buried under camouflage netting. "We need wheels. Or wings. Preferably wings." Vela swallowed the last of the bar and leaned back against the stone, eyes closed. "There's a smuggling route, south of here. Leads to the Cradle Belt, an asteroid chain full of abandoned mining stations. Neutral. Lawless. Perfect for ghosts like us. You've been there. Once. Before the war turned hot." She opened her eyes, and for the first time, Rhys saw exhaustion. Not just physical, but the kind that settled into your bones after years of choosing between duty and desire. "My mother took me. Said every warrior should know what peace smells like, even if they never get to live in it." Rhys didn't ask what happened to her mother. He didn't have to. The war had taken everyone one way or another. By dawn, Vela could walk again, though she leaned on his shoulder more than she'd admit. They moved at a slow, steady pace, avoiding the main trade lanes, sticking to the shadows of dunes and dry riverbeds. Rhys kept his eyes on the sky, watching for skiffs, drones, anything that moved with purpose. Vela kept her eyes on the ground, reading the wind-scoured patterns in the sand like they were scripture. On the third day, they found it. A sand-buried hatch, half-hidden beneath a drift of red dust. The entrance to an old Kelthari supply cache, marked with a faded sigil of the Azure Fong. Vela's breath hitched. "This was my clan's emergency cache," she said, kneeling to clear the sand. If it's still sealed, we might have a way out. Inside, the air was cool and still. The walls glowed faintly with embedded luminomos, casting a soft blue light over rows of storage crates. And there, in the center of the chamber, sat a ship. Not a skiff, not a crawler. A Stardancer-class stealth shuttle, sleek, needle-nosed, built for speed and silence. Its hull was matte silver, etched with the same swirling glyphs that adorned Vela's armor. It looked less like a war machine and more like a dream given form. "You're kidding," Rhys whispered. Vela ran a hand along the hull, her expression unreadable. "My father gave me this. Said every true warrior should have a way to disappear, if the cause ever stopped being worth the cost." She opened the cockpit hatch with a palm print scanner that glowed beneath her touch. He was executed 2 cycles later for suggesting the Dominion seek peace talks. Rhys climbed in beside her, the cockpit snug but familiar, human-compatible controls, thankfully. "Guess he'd be proud of you." "I hope so," she said softly, powering up the core. The engines hummed to life, quiet as a whisper. "Hold on." They lifted off just as the first drone appeared on the horizon. A sleek black hunter-killer, its sensor array sweeping the dunes. Vela didn't engage. She didn't fire. She simply tilted the nose upward and punched the thrusters, the Stardancer vanishing into the upper atmosphere like a shadow swallowed by night. For 3 days, they drifted through the silent black, hopping from dead asteroid to derelict station, always one step ahead of the Dominion's long reach. Rhys patched hull microfractures, recalibrated the oxygen recyclers, and tried not to stare too long at Vela when she slept. Curled in the co-pilot's seat, one hand resting on the plasma pistol at her hip, the other curled around a small, worn pendant he'd never seen before. On the 4th night, as they docked with a derelict fueling outpost orbiting a dead moon, Rhys finally asked, "What's that?" He nodded toward the pendant. She touched it almost unconsciously. "It belonged to my sister, Lyra. She was a scholar, not a warrior. Believed the Kelthari and humans could coexist. Said our differences were bridges, not walls." Pause. "They called her a traitor. She vanished during the Purge of Harmony." Rhys didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, "I'm sorry." Vela looked at him, really looked at him, her storm-gray eyes searching his face like she was memorizing it. "Why do you stay with me, Rhys? You could have left 100 times. Taken a smuggler's ship, vanished into the fringe. No one would have blamed you." He leaned against the console, arms crossed. "Because you're the first person in this whole damn war who's ever looked at me like I mattered. Not as a soldier, not as a tool, but as me. And because," he added, voice dropping, "I think your sister was right. I think bridges are worth building." Vela didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, her fingers cool, her grip firm. "Then we build one." They spent the next week retrofitting the outpost. It was small, a hollowed-out rock with solar panels and a cracked viewport, but it had power, air, and a working comms array. Rhys rigged a medical bay from salvaged supplies. Vela reprogrammed the defense turrets to recognize human biosignatures. Slowly, painstakingly, they turned a tomb into a home. And then, one evening, as Rhys was calibrating a water purifier, a transmission crackled over the open channel. A voice he hadn't heard in years. "Any surviving Terran units, this is Captain Daria Cole of the Iron Mercy. We're broadcasting from neutral space, Sector Gamma 9. If you're out there, we're not hunting you. We're hiding you. We've got a fleet of deserters, medics, engineers, humans who refuse to burn the galaxy for pride. If you've got someone worth protecting, bring them. We've got room." Rhys froze. Daria, his old commanding officer. The one who'd argued against the Scorched Earth orders. The one they'd court-martialed and presumed dead. Vela stood beside him, listening. "You know her?" "Yeah," he said, voice thick. "She's the reason I became a medic." Said healing was the quietest form of rebellion. Vela placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we go. But your people are no longer my only people," she said firmly. "If there's a place where humans and Kelthari can stand side by side without drawing blood, we owe it to Lyra, to every soul lost to this madness." So they plotted a course, not to run, not to hide, but to join. The journey took 2 weeks. They moved through dead zones and nebulae, avoiding patrol routes, living on ration bars and recycled air. But something had shifted between them. The silence wasn't just survival anymore, it was companionship. Sometimes, Vela would hum old Kelthari lullabies while Rhys repaired the NAV computer. Sometimes, Rhys would tell her stories of Earth, of oceans, of rain, of cities that glowed not with plasma fire, but with a million tiny lights. And one night, as they drifted near the edge of the cradle belt, watching a binary star system pulse in the distance, Vela turned to him and said, "If we survive this, would you stay with me? Not just as allies, not just as friends, but as something more." Rhys looked at her, her white hair catching the starlight, her blue skin glowing faintly in the dark, her eyes full of a hope so raw it made his chest ache. "I already have," he said, but their peace was fragile, because as they approached Gamma-9, sensors lit up, not Dominion skiffs, not Terran cruisers. Something else. A massive vessel, its hull covered in organic-looking plating, bristling with weapons that pulsed with sickly green energy. The insignia on its bow was unknown, neither human nor Kelthari. Vela's face went pale. "The Virith." Rhys frowned. "Never heard of them." "They're not from our war," she said, voice tight. "They're scavengers, conquerors. They follow wars like vultures, waiting for the sides to bleed each other dry. Then they take everything left standing." She gripped the controls. "They've found the Iron Mercy." On the view screen, the human fleet, barely a dozen ships, was already under siege. Explosions bloomed in the void like dying flowers. And there, in the center of it all, was the Iron Mercy, shields flickering, engines straining. "They're trying to protect the others," Rhys said, heart pounding. "Buying time." Vela didn't hesitate. She engaged the Stardance's stealth cloak and plotted an intercept course. "Then we don't let them die alone." Rhys armed the shuttle's single torpedo launcher, a pathetic weapon against a capital ship, but it was all they had. "What's the plan?" "We hit their command node," she said, eyes gleaming with the fire he'd come to know so well. "And when they're distracted, you patch up whoever's left." He grinned, despite everything. "Now you're talking." As they dove toward the chaos, Vela keyed the comms, broadcasting on all open channels, human and Kelthari alike. "This is Vela of the Azure Fong," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "I swore an oath. Touch him, and watch me burn planets. But today I say this. Harm one soul aboard that ship, and I will unmake your fleet with my bare hands." And for the first time, she didn't say it just for Rhys. She said it for all of them. The Stardance shot forward, a silver dart in the heart of the storm. Rhys braced himself, hands on the firing controls, heart full of something fiercer than fear. Because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the fight they'd been born to win. Together. The torpedo struck true, not at the Virith command node, but at the unstable energy conduit snaking along their starboard flank. Vela had seen it in the schematics of their earlier scans. A flaw disguised as ornamentation, a weakness hidden in plain sight. The explosion didn't destroy the warship, but it crippled its primary weapons array, sending arcs of green lightning crackling across its hull like panicked veins. In that moment of chaos, the Iron Mercy and its ragtag escort broke formation, not to flee, but to press the advantage. Human fighters, stripped of national insignia and flying under a new banner. A white circle on a field of deep blue, the symbol of sanctuary, swooped in, targeting sensor clusters and engine nacelles with surgical precision. From the Stardance's cockpit, Rhys watched as a Kelthari gunship he hadn't even seen arrive tore through the Virith's rear shield grid, its pilot flying with the reckless grace of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Vela didn't cheer. She didn't gloat. She simply guided their shuttle alongside the Iron Mercy's docking bay, matching velocity with calm hands. As the airlock hissed open, Captain Daria Cole stood waiting, older, scarred, but with the same sharp eyes that had once taught Rhys how to stitch a femoral artery under fire. Behind her stood a dozen faces, human, Kelthari, even a green-skinned mechanic from the Rim worlds, united not by allegiance, but by refusal. "You're late," Daria said, but her voice cracked. "Had to pick up a few supplies," Rhys replied, stepping off the ramp. He turned and offered his hand to Vela. She took it, and walked onto the deck of a human ship without a single weapon drawn against her. In the weeks that followed, the outpost in Gamma-9 grew, not into an army, but into a refuge. Rhys turned the ship's cargo hold into a proper medbay, treating burns, fractures, and the deeper wounds of betrayal and grief. Vela, to everyone's surprise, became their diplomat, not with threats, but with stories. She spoke of Lyra's vision, of Kelthari lullabies, of the taste of Zara's rare night-blooming cactus flower. And slowly, carefully, humans began to see her not as a warrior of a hated empire, but as a woman who'd chosen mercy over might. One evening, As twin moons rose over the asteroid belt outside the viewport, Rhys found Vela standing alone on the observation deck, the pendant resting in her open palm. "They're calling it the Accord now," he said, joining her. "The Gamma 9 Accord. First joint human-Kelthari peace initiative since the war began." She smiled faintly. "Peace isn't a treaty, Rhys. It's what we build every day." He took her hand. "Then let's keep building." Years later, historians would mark that moment. Not the battle, not the escape, but the quiet choice made in the silence between two hearts, as the true turning point. The Virith were driven back. The Dominion fractured. The Terran coalition collapsed under its own weight. And from the ashes, something new took root. Rhys never returned to Earth. But he didn't need to. He'd found his home, not in a place, but in a person. And Vela? She never burned a planet. But she did something far more revolutionary. She helped heal one. Years after the war faded into memory, Rhys and Vela stood beneath the twin suns of a quiet desert moon. No longer a battlefield, but a garden. They'd built a home from reclaimed ship plating and sandstone. Its walls lined with shelves of medical texts, Kelthari poetry, and children's drawings that blended blue and brown handprints in joyful chaos. They married beneath a canopy woven from desert vines and starlight metal, witnessed by former enemies who now called each other friend. Their first child, a daughter with Rhys's eyes and Vela's white hair, was born during a meteor shower. They named her Lyra, in honor of Vela's lost sister. Two more followed, Kaelin, who could stitch a wound by age 6, and Mira, who spoke 3 languages before she could walk. Laughter filled their home, along with the clatter of tiny boots and the hum of lullabies sung in both Terran and Kelthari. Rhys still patched up scrapes and fevers, though now his patients were mostly neighborhood kids and curious desert creatures. Vela taught sword forms not for war, but for discipline. And sometimes, just for fun. She chased the children through the dunes, pretending to be a fearsome warlord until they tackled her in the sand, giggling. Their love grew not in grand declarations, but in quiet moments. Shared water canteens, late-night stories, hands clasped during storms. They adopted 2 more, twins orphaned in the last skirmishes of the Fringe Wars, and raised them as their own, teaching them that family wasn't blood, but choice. On their 10th anniversary, Rhys gave Vela a ring forged from the hull of the Stardancer. She kissed him and said, "You're still my rebellion." And when strangers asked how peace had finally come to the galaxy, veterans would simply smile and say, "Go visit the medic and his warrior wife on Solis 7. Watch how they raise their children." That's how it starts. Their home became a beacon not of power, but of possibility. And every night, no matter how tired, Rhys and Vela would stand on their porch, arms around each other, watching their children chase fireflies across the red sands, dreaming not of war, but of a future stitched together with kindness, courage, and love that crossed stars.